Good evening, YouTube world, social media space. From me, Gordon Causey, and Candy the Wonder Pup, as always. Oh, she is loaded for bear. So, as always, shake a paw, lay down, speak, come up and get your treat. There you go. Thank you for watching. It is now the 26th, so Tuesday, the 26th of September, year 2023. It's 12:36 in the a.m. So it's Tuesday now. Late to me, it's still Monday though. And as always, thank you for watching my miserable and pathetic non-monetized YouTube channel. And again, as always, I'll say it at the end as well. Maybe might forget. Likes, shares, subscriptions, hit the bell. Always appreciated, especially the comments. Always enjoy engagement. Wanted to talk a bit, just wanted to ramble a bit about what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Not so much on the specifics of the war. There's an old saying that most will be familiar with, that the first casualty of war is truth. War is full of disinformation, propaganda. It's de rigueur. All sides engage in it. And what brought this to mind, though, Justin Trudeau gave a speech recently in which I found his stance, his demeanor, his rhetoric, to me, it was reminiscent of what you might see from a Juan Perón in Argentina or Franco in Spain. Very strong man, trying to promote this strong man image, which, being something of a history buff, I find it sends off alarm bells. I feel like I'm being told, oh, get ready for something. And it brought to mind, going back to history, that something that's referred to as atrocity propaganda, and how it's been used historically to bolster support for war. And this is probably as old as human history itself. The enemy, all sides in a conflict will say the enemy is engaging in atrocities. They're raping, they're pillaging, and sometimes it's based, there's truth to it. It might be exaggerated, but there is a core element of truth. And especially when you go back into older history, conflicts between Spain, Great Britain, France, Prussia, the Russian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Europe was embroiled in wars. It's probably never a period, there's probably never been a decade that hasn't had war in Europe, going back to, over 1,000 years. War is a constant. And would the common soldiery engage in atrocities? Yes, on both sides. And so it's a good way to stir up support for war. But when conflicts expand, the propaganda can become even more blatant. And I'll throw out the example of World War I. And this is not something I find to be commonly known or taught in history class. I didn't learn it in history class, but there's plenty of information out there available to anyone who wants to, just do a little bit of reading. If you look at World War I, between the Western powers and the Central powers, and before that war started, there was this, everyone was lining up their dance partners. The Ottoman Empire, or the Turkish Empire, if you prefer, was kind of left in the lurch. They were looking for a dance partner, and they were rebuffed by the Western powers. And they were basically left to choose between either the Russian Empire, because remember, this is before the Bolshevik Revolution, before Russia morphed into the Soviet Union. So it was still Tsarist Russia. And the Ottomans had to choose between either Russia or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, what we typically refer to as Germany. And they were disinclined to line up with the Russians because they were certain that the Russians were simply going to come in and take them over. And the Ottoman Empire, that was the Middle East, Turkey, and it included at that time, most of the world's proven oil reserves. And for the first time in history, oil had become a major world commodity. And so ultimately, they were more or less forced to line up with the Germans. And what happened in that war, it started in 1914. And basically what happened is after a year or so, nothing had happened. I mean, everyone had been gearing up for this war, and it started. The pretext was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, who was the presumptive heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That was more or less the pretext. Once his assassination happened, dominoes started to fall. Serbia declares war, and then and everyone, all the alliances start coming into play, and over the ensuing weeks and months, the entire developed world joined in. And about a year into the conflict, nothing had really happened in terms of territory changing hands. There were no winners, only losers. And the Germans, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, basically went to the British and said, let's call it a draw. Let's have a truce, and let's just go back to the way things were. And at that time, the Brits were inclined to accept the offer because they were bleeding. Everyone, as I say, no one was winning, everyone was losing. And so they were inclined to accept the offer. But then the Baron von Rothschild went to the British War Cabinet, specifically to the British Minister of Defense, a gentleman by the name of Balfour, Balfour, and he said, "Don't give in. Don't sign the peace deal. Don't sign a truce. Keep fighting. We Rothschild said, we will get the Americans in on your side. We'll get the United States of America to join the Western powers." And the Brits basically said, okay, what do you want? What's the payoff? And the payoff, which was later signed, a declaration referred to as the Balfour Declaration, stated that once the Western powers had won the war, that Britain would then, because the Austrian-Hungarian Empire had allied itself with the Turkish or Ottoman Empire, that empire, the old Ottoman Empire, included Palestine, what is now in today's world Israel. And they said, you will create a Jewish nation state within biblical Palestine. And the Brits signed off on it. And then what happened is U.S. media outlets started to propagandize the population. And that's when they started to refer to the Germans as the Huns. Now, you might think that was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so it had something to do with the Hungarian part of the empire. But I actually believe, and a lot of people believe, it was simply trying to align the German side with Attila the Hun, make them appear like these marauding monsters. And further, there were stories that the horrible Huns, the Germans, they were cutting. One example was they were cutting the hands off of Belgian children. The horror, and this was sold into the American press, and it led to the United States under Woodrow Wilson joining the war in, I think it was May of 1917, when the U.S. joined the war effort and basically tipped the balance and allowed the Western powers to win atrocity propaganda. And there's a more recent example, not necessarily a better example, but certainly a more recent example would have been in and around 1990. That was when George H.W. Bush was the president of the United States, and Saddam Hussein and Iraq had invaded the sovereign state of Kuwait. And there were reports that Saddam Hussein, who was an ally of the United States, there are pictures you can find of George H.W. Bush, President George H.W. Bush, and his Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, breaking bread with Saddam Hussein. The Americans had backed Iraq in a 7-8 year war with Iran. And they, basically, maybe less than a mile of territory changed hands. I mean, it was basically a stalemate. You had Iran was backed by the old Soviet Union, and Iraq was backed by the Americans. And so when that invasion started and the Americans decided they were going to liberate Kuwait, they needed to sell the war. So one of the lines they used, they said, "We're fighting for democracy," was one of the lines. And some people, though, said, well, wait a minute. Kuwait isn't a democracy. It's an emirate state, a kingdom, basically. It's ruled by a royal family. There's no voting. No, it's not a representative democracy. Why are you saying we're fighting for democracy? So they said, well, Saddam Hussein's, his Republican Guard and everything, their military machine is a major threat to world peace and security. And then people said, well, wait a minute. This is a guy who fought Iran, just one country. He fought Iran for that war went on 5, 6, 7 years, and they couldn't even beat just Iran. This is the major threat to world peace and security, really? And so then what happened was the Bush administration, George H.W., not W, who was elected George H.W. Bush's son, but George H.W., the elder. His administration engaged a PR agency, and they came up with an idea. And what they did is they had a young Kuwaiti girl addressed a joint session of Congress. So you have the House and the Senate sitting together. And this young girl, I think she was about 12 years of age, a young Kuwaiti girl, she claimed that from addressing this joint session, that Iraq's soldiers were throwing babies out of incubators. You can look this up. And that, it was reminiscent to me of what the American press, the propaganda they put out about German soldiers cutting the hands off of Belgian children. Now you had Iraq soldiers throwing babies out of incubators. It was later revealed and discovered that this was the invention of this PR agency that had been engaged by the Bush administration, and the young girl who they put up and presented as simply a young Kuwaiti girl. She was actually a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. She was the daughter of an emir. And so this use of atrocity propaganda to stir people up and to get them to support a war is nothing new. And I'm finding I participate on Reddit. My handle is Growacet, Growacet. Kind of a play on a pharmaceutical product. You have Percocet. Different drugs will have a CET at the end, so Growacet, grow a pair. Ha ha ha! I made it a number of years ago. Anyway, Reddit's a popular forum. Particularly among military and ex-military. And I started participating in a forum for the Russian-Ukraine war. But what I find incredible about it is that, we tend to think that we live in a liberal democratic world where things like free speech and freedom of expression are cherished ideals. And yet you're not allowed to say anything in this forum that is not gung-ho for war. I'm editorializing, but that's what it boils down to. You have to be all in on your support of Ukraine, and you have to be all in on the big bad Russians and the super virtuous, wonderful Ukrainians. And I take a more centrist view. Again, the first casualty of war is truth. Are the Russians engaging in propaganda and disinformation? Absolutely. Are the Ukrainians and her allies engaging in disinformation and propaganda? Yes, absolutely. There's no difference. All sides lie in conflict. And this is another alarming aspect to me. When you squelch dissent and when you won't allow opposing viewpoints to have any space in the public discourse, and then hearing the way Trudeau is, beating the war drum, an escalation of this war, and more importantly, an expansion of this war. So right now it's Russia, Ukraine, but could we see Poland involved? Could we see China involved? Something that's often forgotten is that a year or so ago, China and Russia signed something. I would invite you to look it up. It's called the No Limits Partnership, basically saying we're joined at the hip. It's similar to what NATO has. An attack on one is an attack on all. Well, you have this no limits partnership between Russia and communist China. And now, as I mentioned in a previous video, we've recently had Vladimir Putin of Russia. He went and visited Kim Jong-il in North Korea. Kim Jong-il came to Russia. He came and visited Putin in Russia, and now Putin is saying that he is going to return the favor. He's going to go and visit Kim Jong-il in North Korea. And so you talk about the potential for an expansion of this war. What we're having now is everyone's lining up dance partners. I believe it's the Norwegians who within the last year or so have just started to apply for membership in NATO. Norway, which is right on Russia's border, had been neutral, not belonging to the old Soviet bloc or to the Western NATO bloc, and now they've applied to NATO. And this is what happens at times of global conflict, is that countries start forming their alliances. And this is, I made, reference it again. I made 3 predictions back on April 30th. One it did not come to pass. I had put forth the idea that I was expecting to see the declaration of a global climate emergency, either, maybe unilaterally by the United States, maybe globally by the UN, or maybe even the World Health Organization, because they'd say it's a health threat. And that's what I was expecting. And I put a timeline on it. That's always dangerous because I have something of an immediacy bias. When I see something coming, I expect it to come fast. Things sometimes grind slower. So I said that there would be a climate emergency declared before the end of the summer. Well, we're now into the fall. First day of fall, I think, was September 21st. So we're 5 days past that. And there hasn't been this declaration of a climate emergency. The closest that we've come is the Biden administration has just issued an executive order, and they've created something called the Climate Corps. You have the Marine Corps, you have the Peace Corps. Well, now they have the Climate Corps, CORPS. like a military body that's going to fight climate change or something. I have no idea. I see this climate core as being almost like oh, put on your brown shirts and go agitate and scare people and make them believe that the climate is going to change radically, and unless we, overhaul the agricultural sector and get everyone off meat and eating bugs, and we get people to stop driving. It's come out recently that France has just banned short haul flights, 2-3 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that. You're not allowed to take a flight anymore. The old line of, from the WEF, their branding statement that came out saying you will own nothing and be happy. I heard this put as, you'll go nowhere and be happy. 15-minute cities. The other prediction was COVID. That was for the fall. That we would see potentially another declaration of a health emergency centered around COVID, RSV, flu, maybe all three, maybe those three and something else, something of a health emergency. And even now with this new booster for the XBB.1.5 or whatever, this new shot that's just been authorized all around the world, Canada, US, European Authority, Great Britain, that I would not be surprised to see a reimposition of vaccine mandates. And then the last of the three predictions was an escalation expansion of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I watched a recent video. I'll kind of wrap it up with this. Anyone curious, if you wonder where I get my thoughts, views, opinions from, what influences me, I just recently, a guy I go to church with, recommended to me to watch Jack Hibbs. That's not Gibbs, Hibbs with an H, Hibbs. And he has a channel and it's called Happening Now. And I just saw him, I think came out within the last month. And the gentleman's name is an Israeli, Amir Farsadi. And I may not be pronouncing Amir's name right, but Happening Now, Jack Gibbs, Amir something that sounds close to Farsadi, and they talk about the geopolitical situation with everything that's happening now, the expansion of Russia's influence in places like Africa, China. We know that they are the ascending power in the world. The US is going down and China is on the rise. There's no other conclusion you can draw at this point. Recently, within the last few months or so, within the last 7-8 months, China brokered a rapprochement of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and I think it was Jordan, which in of itself, hey, great, they're reestablishing diplomatic relations, fantastic, sounds good. Diplomatic relations are what are used to avoid war. It's better to have dialogue than death. And the striking thing is that used to be the domain of the United States of America. They more or less played the world's policeman, the world's diplomatic strongman, and they would go in and they would broker these type of relationship deals. Think of Jimmy Carter when he had Camp David between Israel and I think it was Menachem Begin and Egypt's Anwar Sadat. That's always been the domain of the United States. Now, though, the U.S. is kind of on the outside looking in as China is now becoming the predominant world player. And this is a transitionary period, and transitionary periods are not stable because everyone's going to be fighting to get their hands on the wheel. The U.S., their grip of the steering wheel is loosening, and you have this World Economic Forum. They're envisioning taking control. You have Vladimir Putin, you have China, you have all these different players fighting to be the top dog in the so-called New World Order. And when you watch this happening now, it comes from very much a Christian perspective. And looking at biblical prophecy, many Christians will assert that history is prophecy confirmed, and prophecy is history foretold, that it's coming, conflict is coming. The most illuminating thing I saw in that was basically a red line about countries that the Russians and Chinese have allied themselves with in Africa. And it basically goes from North Africa, from Northwest Africa, right across to the Middle East to Northeast Africa, and Niger, and a number of other countries. And it's a little too in-depth to try and just talk about glibly off the cuff, but I would recommend giving that a look. Again, Jack Hibbs happening now with about a month ago with Amir Farsadi. And outside of that, not much to say. The world continues grinding on. It's easy to bury your head in the sand and pretend that things are normal. Blue Jays now look like a lock to make the postseason as a wild card team, and probably going to be playing Tampa Bay in a 3-game series, best 2 out of 3, all in Tampa Bay. You know, the Maple Leafs, I think they've started their training camps and preseason games. You know, so you can kind of pretend that everything is good. But if you look beyond that, there are storm clouds everywhere. And I was at church this past Sunday. I'll admit I've been remiss. For about a month, for 4 or 5 weeks, I hadn't attended a worship service. Not a loss of faith on my part, just a loss of motivation, a loss of what am I going to hear? But it's important to be in community. And so for the last 2 weeks, I've been back. And I do see a thirst and a hunger and a desire for people looking for truth in a world that is so full of lies. The 4 big issues happening in the world right now, as I see things, are you have the health issue, you can generally call it COVID. Then you have climate, where we're being told the planet's not going to be around, unless a drastic action, unless we impoverish people and make energy unaffordable. So you got COVID, you got climate, then you got this gender stuff, where they're trying to foist this idea on the population that gender is nothing more than a societal construct imposed by an oppressive patriarchy, classic Marxist rhetoric, to foment division in the population. And then you have this war between Ukraine and Russia that looks to me like it's threatening to expand beyond that geographic area. And that's a scary notion. Are we talking about Canada? Are we talking about the US? Are we talking about other NATO nations sending more than just money and equipment? Are we talking about sending personnel? And now are we talking about China joining in? Are we talking about North Korea joining in? Are we talking about other Russian allies, in this red line in Africa? Are they going to join in? A lot going on. One great thing came out of that talk on Happening Now, something I was well aware of, that the Chinese have basically taken over Afghanistan now. And Afghanistan is basically the world's major supplier of lithium that run cars, phones, and all our electronic devices. Everything runs on lithium now. And basically pretty much the world's largest supply of it is in Afghanistan. And the Chinese have more or less just walked in and filled the vacuum. You think about Afghanistan, anyone who thinks that war in Afghanistan was about, women's rights and everything like that, Now, there were a number of reasons for that war, and none of them were for the stated reasons. It had nothing to do with women's rights or the real reasons are, if you look at, pull out your globe, pull out a map, and look at Afghanistan. I've got a globe here. It's something of a hub. It's around. It touches so many different countries. It touches Iran, Pakistan, India, China. It's almost like the center of a wheel. It's the hub of a wheel. So geopolitically, its geography is so central. Second part is you can look up the Caspian Sea. The Caspian Sea has something referred to as the Caspian Oil Basin, which at one time was thought to have about 25 years worth of oil for the entire globe, a 25-year supply, 25-year global supply of oil. Only thing is the Caspian Sea is landlocked, and you would need to get that oil onto ships so that it could be refined. And so there was a proposed pipeline that was to go through, and I got to look at, Turkmenistan. I read it. There's an old U.S. American Vietnam War vet and foreign war correspondent. His name is Eric Margulies, and he used to refer to this part of the world, that part of the world, as Petrolistan. But anyway, there was a pipeline proposed that would have gone through Turkmenistan, then to Afghanistan, then to Pakistan, then to India. It was referred to as the TAPI pipeline, TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. The pipeline would then end in India, where the oil coming from that Caspian oil basin would be put onto ships, and those ships would then go to Qatar or somewhere in the Middle East to be refined. And interestingly, most will remember that Kandahar, and where most of the fighting was taking place, it was all in the southern portion of Afghanistan. Well, that was the proposed pipeline route. They didn't care about the north. They didn't care about the mountains. They wanted this pipeline route. But there's also lithium and a number of other natural resources. And, that's why Afghanistan, the Brits tried to get control of it. The Soviet Union, in around 1980, they invaded. They wanted it. And then the Americans went in under the pretext of terrorism and everything else. But it was always a cock up. They're never going to state the real reasons for a war. What you're given is excuses, propaganda, and to tie it all back in, atrocity, propaganda. I've got my radar up, so to speak. I'm not predicting it, but I'm going to be watching for it. If there's suddenly some major, I would imagine that given our side, geopolitical side, Canadians, Americans, we would be programmed to think that something, the Russian soldiers are doing this horrible thing to children or something. Anyway, I have someone commenting, Sat12, if hypothetically Trump ran against Biden now, what do you think his percentage chance of winning the election would be? I'll be honest, I think Trump won the last election. I think, I genuinely believe sleepy, creepy Joe Biden. I don't think he has the genuine, legitimate support of enough voters to get reelected against Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean he wouldn't be reelected. I forget who said it. It's a famous quote, but it doesn't matter how many votes are cast. What matters most is who counts the ballots. I like our Canadian system far better because we actually go in, we get a little piece of paper, a little piece of cardboard, fold up paper with the candidates list on it, and you actually mark a physical X, and then you drop it into a box. There's none of this vote pulling machines or our mail-in ballot system. You actually have to apply to send in a mail-in ballot. And I think it's harder to rig a Canadian federal election than it is with the way you've got such a the American. I'm assuming you're an American, and the Americans have such a hodgepodge, such a you know, every state counts and administers their vote differently. And even the Electoral College, while most states, the delegates sent to the Electoral College are, it's winner take all, some do it a little bit differently. It's a very convoluted system because of your system of state rights versus federal rights. And in a lot of respects, I have preferred the American system, but I don't like the way you conduct your actual elections, and I don't like the way you count your votes. I don't like machines. Machines can be manipulated. It's going to be interesting to see. If you want to watch that happening now, Amir Farsadi talks about Israeli politics and the attacks on Netanyahu, and he basically sees a parallel between the manner in which the radical extremist left attacked Netanyahu, and he thinks that's the playbook that they followed when they went after Trump. It's fascinating to watch. And also he talks about this gentleman, Barack, not Barack Obama, but Barack in Israel, and how he thinks he was compromised. Top lithium producing countries: 1, Australia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Zimbabwe, Portugal, Canada. Those are producing, but if I would invite you to look up lithium reserves, proven lithium reserves, countries with that are proven to have large lithium reserves. I'm amazed, I'm surprised to see Australia. Chile doesn't surprise me at all. Argentina, Brazil, South America, and it's a brutal mining practice that primarily relies on children. And so I knew about those countries. Australia surprised me. Canada doesn't. I know I was invested in a lithium company, a Canadian lithium. Well, I invested in a couple Lithium Americas and Nemaska. I think Nemaska was a penny stock. I made some good money on it, but it was I viewed it as sketchy. Number 3 was China. I'm going to do it right now while we're talking. My computer's a little slow because I'm running this video. Okay, this is Yahoo Finance. And lithium by country. Story continues. I was just looking for something simple. I don't want to read it. 15. So 15 is Mali, Russian Federation, Republic of Serbia, Chechnya, Mexico, Canada. 9 they have. Democratic Republic of Congo, Germany, China. China they have as number 6. And that's where it ends. I'd read that before. This is one of the things that's dangerous in today's world, is you read something, hear something, and you and I'm guilty, you take it as fact. And this, now, this is August 2021. The U.S. government has reportedly estimated the lithium deposits in Afghanistan could rival those in Bolivia. And this is probably similar to the articles I read. When Bolivia said at that time, 2021, and this is as per CNN, was said to have the world's largest reserves. So that's something I'll look into. a question. There's reserves, and then there are proven reserves. Mining is a convoluted industry, so you can have suspected reserves or forecasted reserves, but then you can actually have proven reserves. And it may be that Afghanistan is seen as having potential reserves, but not proven documented reserves. Anyway, keep an eye out for war propaganda. That's all I'm going to say, and especially atrocity propaganda. And atrocity propaganda typically tries to play on your emotions to elicit an emotional response, because, as I've said so many times, when you get someone into an emotional state, their capacity to think rationally goes away. When Americans and citizens all around the world, people all around the world, were told that Iraq's soldiers were throwing babies out of incubators, people just stopped thinking and they were like, go get them! Get those evil Iraq soldiers! We've got to invade! And that was the desire. That's why they made up the lie, because the first thing you should ask anytime they come out with anything, whether it be from Russia, from Ukraine, or from the United States, from Canada, from any political leader, ask yourself the question, is it true? Why would they lie? Is there a do they have a motivation? Do they have an incentive to lie? So God bless. Like, share, subscribe. You know all the drill. I like the dopamine rush. I like the endorphin, or whatever that little chemical in the brain is. Guilty. And I like to inject my voice into the public discourse. This allows me to do that. The more subscribers I have, when someone just scans by my channel and they look and they say, oh, the guy's got 120, he's got 200, whatever the number is, the more it is, the better. So God bless. We'll talk to you again. And I'll do some reading on what Afghanistan's lithium deposits are actually like. I think there'll be a disconnect between proven reserves and forecasted or estimated reserves. So I got Sad asking me another question. Do you think if all Western support for Ukraine was withdrawn and Russia took it over, it would be more a more or less stable? It would be more stable. Absolutely, it would be 100% more stable. The thing that has to be remembered is that during the entire Soviet era, Russia, or the Soviet Union, I mean, it was all part of the Soviet Union. And that's why, to this day, most Ukrainians, spasibo, pожалуйста, до свидания, they speak Russian. Privet, товарищ. Yeah, I speak a little bit of Russian. I know a few phrases. I don't know any Ukrainian, so I guess that makes me biased. But I mean, basically, it's that part of the world is so bloody corrupt, and it's just a question of which criminal gets to be in charge. And when you have criminals fighting between each other, I mean, think of it in terms of watching the Godfather movies, when the Tattaglia family and the Corleone family are fighting at each other. It's not good for anyone. It just is a lot of bloodshed. Things are better when the pecking order is settled and decided on. I know people who are Ukrainian, and I know people who are Russian. And one of the individuals I know is a Russian who lived in ethnic Russian who lived in Crimea. And Crimea was always a part of the Russian Empire. And after the Bolshevik Revolution, when the Soviet Union arose, the Soviet Union basically gave the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. Here, you administer this. We'll make our little, you're Ukraine, you're Chechnya, you're Georgia, you're this, you're that. So Crimea will be included. For most of the population as ethnic Russian. So their allegiances, their I guess that's probably the best word. Their allegiance is mostly to Russia because they're ethnic Russian. The reason Beijing is interested in Afghanistan's lithium reserves is related also to their proximity. Yeah, it's right on their doorstep. According to Mulibullah Sharif, a political science expert in Kabul. Afghanistan, pull out a map. I mean, it is such a incredibly, it borders Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, China, Pakistan. It's almost like the hub of a wheel in a very geopolitically important part of the world. And I have friends brothers in arms who served in Afghanistan. I myself did not. And the one thing when it came to IEDs is a lot of times the ordnance was believed to be of Chinese origin. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, the Americans wanted to undermine the Afghan regime, and so they got into bed with the Taliban to destabilize the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Now, the United States then invaded with their coalition, which included Canada, but make no mistake, it was the US was the driving force behind that invasion. Well, would the Chinese engage in efforts to try and destabilize the American occupation of Afghanistan? Absolutely. They would do the same thing that the Americans did when the Russians were there, because nobody wants, it's like that shiny ball on the playground. Nobody wants anyone else to have it. Whoever gets it, they're immediately at threat of having it taken away from them. So Sat 1-2, I don't know. Why does Trump seem to like the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-il? I think Trump, gravitates toward strength, and he gravitates toward anyone that will bow down to him. He likes to be among the powerful, among the wealthy, among the elite, but he also likes people who acquiesce to him. And Trump is, the positive things I said about him earlier notwithstanding, Trump is an egomaniac on steroids. He's an alpha male. And, he's got to be number one, no matter what, whether he wins ethically or unethically, it doesn't matter, so long as he wins, so long as he comes out on top, even if he has to, do things that are sketchy, he'll do them because they're justifiable, because he's the top dog. And, anything that makes Trump look good. I mean, look at the jabs. Look at the jabs. Trump wants credit for the COVID vaccines because a lot of Americans, rightly or wrongly, a lot of Americans think, they believe, and I would say they've been programmed to believe that the reason things are so good now is because of the wonderful COVID vaccines. And Trump wants to be seen by these individuals as their savior. I'm the one, I did the warp speed. It was me. I want the credit. Anyway, that's why at least part of the reason why I think Trump likes Kim Jong-il. So, Trump can't handle any criticism. If anyone criticizes him, he immediately, oh, that guy is overrated. Get to do my Trump impression. Horribly overrated. Arnold Schwarzenegger, his show on TV when he tried to take over The Apprentice, he killed it. They need me. I'm the only one. Trump. I don't like Trump. I don't like his personality at all. However, with that being said, if I have to choose between sleepy, creepy Joe Biden and alpha male, unethical, do anything to win, narcissist on steroids Donald Trump, I'm taking Trump. Unfortunately, it's two crappy choices, but there's no competition. Trump wins. Anyway, God bless. I've gone on way too long. I don't like to. kind of like to keep my videos under 30 minutes, maybe under 20, kind of 15 would be ideal, but I can't do it because I'm just an old guy who likes to ramble and share my thoughts. But Sat 1-2 or Sat 12, however you want. I don't know if this is your first time seeing my channel. I don't recall seeing your name before, but I really appreciate you engaging, and especially in the manner you did. That was fantastic. So God bless all, and we'll talk to you again in a few days. Things are always happening. Good night now.